Hello, y'all. My name is Casey. Your name is probably something awesome like Calendula or Brian, and welcome to what is probably my channel.
Case can probably read.
So, in my last video, I kind of introduced this idea of a series that I want to tackle of books that I was supposed to read when I was in high school. I've got a list of about 11 books that I was supposed to read for classwork when I was in high school, and for whatever reason I just never finished them. I've been inside them, I've read passages and sections of them, but I've never read them from cover to cover. So I am going to try and rectify that now, and I'm going to let you know how it goes. So the first book that I wanted to tackle on this list is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I picked this one because it was short and sweet, and I thought it was a good way to jump into this series because I got some real doozies on my list. I'm going to work my way up to them. I did try to record myself giving you a brief rundown of the plot of this book, and what I discovered is that I am a nonsensical rambler and I am physically unable to do that. Everything that I tried was not succinct. There was no clarity to it. So if you haven't read these books, if you want to understand what's going on, you can either go read the book, which it's really short. You probably should. But if you can't do that, then do what I did when I was 17 and go online and find a detailed synopsis, and then you will know what's going on. I'm just going to kind of hit some high points on my impressions about this book. I'm going to tell you something that surprised me about it, something I liked or that made me think, something that I didn't care for, and then my favorite quote. Okay, so let's start with the thing that surprised me about this book. I don't think anybody really goes into the reading of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde just completely blank, not knowing what it's going to be about. There are enough literary references and pop culture references to this story that I feel like you have some idea of what this book is going to be about. Just this, the idea of kind of a duality of man, that there are two people within us of, you know, a really Jekyll-ish kind of angelic do-gooder, pure person side of us, and then a Hyde, dark, evil side to us. And so you have an idea before you even crack the cover what this book is going to be about. When I was in high school, I actually saw the musical Jekyll and Hyde, and I think that's probably another reason why I didn't read it, was because I thought that I must have had enough secondary material that I could get by without it. But the thing that I remember from that musical and from other adaptations that I think I've come across, you know, in TV and film in my lifetime, they gave off the impression that the reason that Jekyll decided to kind of split himself, that he had noble reasons for doing this, that he was trying to root out the evil and dark part of himself and separate it so that he could be a creature of just, you know, purity and light and goodness. So that's actually what I had always thought was the purposes of his experiment. But when I read the book, I found out that that really wasn't the case. It was more about Jekyll having an awareness that he had certain desires and urges that he did not think that his society would approve of, at least not in a man of his standing. And so I'm not sure if that's why he performed the experiment, but it's definitely why he continued the experiment, was because in the creation of Hyde, he had this person who was free, did not feel inhibitions to explore those desires and urges that Jekyll had always been afraid to explore himself. And so he went on with the experiment because Hyde gave him that outlet to see what would happen if he went down that road, because Hyde looked completely different than him. It wasn't traced back to him. And so he could experience those things and still be Jekyll, the good guy, the good doctor, and no one would be any the wiser. So that was something that really surprised me, was that his intentions were not really noble at all. They were just him saying, hey, let's see what I can get away with, essentially. At least from my understanding of the text, that's what surprised me and what I gathered from it. Okay, so on to the thing that I liked, or the thing that made me think. One thing that I noticed about this book is that in Henry Jekyll, you kind of start to understand the weight that shame can kind of put on a person. Just seeing how desperate he was to be seen in a certain light, and how everything else just had to kind of give way before it. That when he had the temptation to have Hyde do all these things and experience the things that would have brought him shame, it was so enticing. It was like almost he couldn't resist it. I don't know, just thinking about some of the things that have been happening in our world recently, most specifically the shootings that were in Georgia just a few weeks ago, or just last month. I just was really impressed with this idea that we so often as a society, especially, in like religious societies, because I grew up as a evangelical Christian, just the amount that we weaponize shame. And I think that, in our understanding of shame, we think that when we get people to feel ashamed, that we're going to cause a change within them, that they're going to change for the better, that the weight of that shame will force, a character growth in them, that they'll be able to defeat all their, dark urges or whatever, and become a better person simply from the weight of shame. And I think what this book brings out, and what some of these current events bring out, is that's just not how it works. You can't just leave someone to be crushed under the weight of that shame without helping them work that out. If somebody had maybe tried to help Jekyll, if instead of him just experiencing the weaponizing effect of that shame and being able to take some of that pressure off of himself, that some of those things might never have happened. The murder, Hyde taking over, him feeling that his only outlet was to be Hyde, that might never have happened if he hadn't been left to suffer that alone. That's just my take on it. That's something that got me thinking. I don't know if that's what the writer intended, but that's what went on in my head as I was reading this. As for the thing that I didn't really like about this book, there was one particular thing about this story that really kind of bugged me, and that was that every time somebody sees Edward Hyde, they always express, in the book, they always express that there's a wrongness to him. And they can never really pinpoint exactly what the wrongness is. And I know maybe that's supposed to be in support of what the author's trying to do here, that sometimes that's how we feel about evil, is we can't really say why it's evil, just that we don't like it. And people would see Edward Hyde and they would say, I don't remember, if you asked me to describe him, I couldn't tell you why I didn't like him, but I really didn't like him. They would say, I looked at the cop or the doctor next to me and I could see that he hated this Hyde character, just in his eyes, and that he wanted to kill him just like I did. And then, when you get to the, why did you want to kill him? Why did he inspire this kind of disdain and hate in you? And then they were like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I just know I didn't like him. There was something wrong about him. There's something off about him. There's something deformed about him. I didn't care for that. I think that if you're gonna say that you hate something, especially if that something is a person, then you probably ought to explain why. This was a different time. this was a different motive story. So it is what it is. I just didn't like it. And finally, my favorite quote from this book comes courtesy of the POV character, Mr. Utterson. This comes from a point in the story where he has heard a lot of people describe Mr. Hyde. He has not yet seen him in person for himself. He really wants to, because he wants to understand what's going on with his friend Jekyll and the infamous Mr. Hyde. And so he waits outside Mr. Hyde's house to catch a glimpse of him, and he waits for many, many days before he does. And he says the following: "If he be Mr. Hyde," he had thought, "then I shall be Mr. Seek." Puns. So anyhow, am I glad that I didn't read it when I was in high school? No, I wouldn't say that I am. I kind of wish that I just bit the bullet at the time and read it then, because I think that I would have had a lot more understanding throughout my life of what that book was about. I am glad that I read it. I think that I understand a lot more about the text and the story behind Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde than I did before I read it. Will I read it again? Doubtful. I've got about 10 more books on my list that I've got to finish. However, today I get to cross this one off. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really done talking. So thank you for watching my videos. If my brand of awkward appeals to you, please feel free to like, subscribe, or comment below. And I'll see you next time.